Good evening.
Good evening.
Good
Good
evening.
afternoon.
We go ahead and call our 4:30 p.m. Budget work session to order. I think I got text from Ms. Noon, who said she probably joined us late, as well as Mr. Walker. He's starting a meeting. He'll call us when we get a break free for that meeting. As you know, the purpose of the today's budget work sessions is really to for us to consider those adjustments that we actually discussed at our last budget work session, or that we pushed into this particular time. So it's not just to rehash the budget, but just simply to get the administrator out in terms of those adjustments based on some of the things that we approved. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Brown.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members of council. We're going to start by, there is an agenda that I emailed out to all council, and hopefully you have received that. We're going to start and kind of go down that agenda in the order that's presented. And we're going to start with a financial overview that's going to be presented by Director Ham, who is on the line. Director Ham, if you could unmute yourself and please give that financial overview, ma'am.
Yes, this is Stacy Ham, Finance Director. We've wrapped up a good bit of last year. We haven't completely closed out the year, but we have some pretty good preliminary numbers. The revenue came in above budget, about 1.2 million, which is really good. Our lost money came in on track, so we did well with that. There was an increase related to the taxes, the state revenue, and some ambulance fees that help contribute to the increase in our revenue. The expenses are far below what we had budgeted. They were about 15.8 million less than what we had budgeted to spend. So the departments were reducing their expenditures at the request of Mr. Brown. And I think that a lot of us were able to hold steady. So we ended up only spending 91% of the budgeted expenditures last year. The general fund expense, the general government expenses were the biggest one that had the reduction of about 12 million of that for general government expenses. And I'm sorry about that. And the general fund was paid back the 3 million from the utilities. So that helped replenish our fund balance. So the unassigned fund balance increased the 4.8 because we got the 3 million back from utilities. So at the end of the year, our fund balance, unassigned fund balance, is about $45.9 million, which is at the 28% range, which is in our 20 to 30% range. So this will allow us to have a little bit of, cushion to help cover for the projection of the shortfall in revenue for this coming year. So hopefully that will give us a little reprieve on when the revenues don't come in on the fund balance.
Thank you, Director Ham. Mr. Chair, certainly we were not.
Let me make sure everybody doesn't have any questions from reference Ms. Ham's presentation there.
Mr. Chairman.
Man, you recognize.
So we're September now. Do we have any of the figures for revenue for the month of July?
Yes, I forgot to mention that. Yes, I have looked at what we've gone so far. Treasurer's office has through July. We haven't really closed out any of August, but right now we're on track. And looking at expenditures, we're on track. We've actually spent a little bit less than we did at this time last year so far in expenditures. And our revenue, the taxes are a little bit higher, not, 40, 50,000 is not a lot of money when you're talking the millions of dollars. But so right now the taxes are tracking a little bit higher, not much than when they were last year. So I don't see a downturn of where we were last year at this time.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else? If not, Mr. Brown, you may go ahead. No, Ms. McBride, is your hand up? Oh, excuse me. Ms. Malinowski, you say something now?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair, thank you. Ms. Ham, you gave a figure that the revenue is about 46,000 higher through July over last year, but you only said that we spent a little bit less. Do you have a dollar figure to put with that, please?
Yes, we've spent 160,000 less through August than we did last year. We
Okay.
spent around 25 million.
Okay, but your revenue figure was only through July, not August, correct?
Correct, yeah, because the taxes aren't booked yet. Expenses are because those checks are being cut, but the revenue isn't because there are accruals and
Between the less spending of 160,000 and the 46,000 higher income, we're looking at about 206,000, correct?
correct, which is small considering our $100 million budget, but
Right.
yeah, but it's on track.
Yeah.
Ms. McBride, did you need to speak? I think your hand is
Mr.
up.
Chair, the only thing I was saying to Ms. Ham and Mr. Brown and to council members, it seems like a pretty decent report, a good report, given the circumstances that we're in.
Sir Brown.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. I was going to say to that point, Ms. McBride, Councilmember McBride, I was going to say that to the council, while we certainly have these reportings that we're looking at, I don't want to sound too excited and I don't want to sound doom and gloom. As you've probably seen on the news throughout the state, I believe the comptroller recently had a report, and certainly on the national level, that we just don't know what the ultimate outcome will be. So yes, we are, we feel better than we were projecting a few months ago, but at the same time, we want to be cautiously optimistic. And so my budget adjustments and the information I've presented to you are designed to be cautiously optimistic because we still have some budgetary things we take care of even before COVID-19 was ever present. So, but yes, ma'am, Ms. McBride, you're right. That is certainly better news than we were anticipating. Yes, ma'am.
Thank
Yes.
you. I agree with what you're saying. Thank you.
So what I want to do, Mr. Chair, members of council, if you have the ability to do so, I want to take just a few moments. I know this is a work session and you're not going to be able to make any formal decisions, but I want to just talk through the memorandum that I sent out, which outlines a few recommendations that I have for you to consider. And at the next appropriate time when we meet, certainly I would like to have the council, vote up or down these items or make adjustments to them. So I'm going to start with item 1 on that recommendation list. And what the recommendation simply says is a motion to.
Mr. Chair, could we get the date that was sent out so I can try to locate it?
Mr. Malinowski, was sent out this morning, sir.
Oh.
Via email. You'd like me to try to tell you what time it was? Would that be helpful?
Yes, please.
Okay, give me a quick second here. We'll get that for you. About 10:53, sir.
Okay, thank,
It would have come from Ashia Myers, the Assistant to the County Administrator.
okay, thank you, sir. I'll find it.
Thank you, sir. And again, just to remind everybody, if you have not had,
Mr. Chair,
Uh,
Mr. Chair,
Ms. Myers,
Mr. Brown, if you can, I'm sorry, can you have somebody send that to my Gmail? I don't see it, and I'd like to follow along. Thank you.
yes, ma'am, Mr. Chair, give me a second, because I'm not sure that everybody has that. So what I'm going to do is, give me just a quick second, I'm going to exit this full screen. I'm still here, but I'm
I was
going to,
about to say, can you post it? Yes.
yeah, I'm going to pull up that information so I can send it to her real quick. So, well, you want me to try to share it?
Can you share it on the monitor here?
I can, but I've heard in the past, some council members said that it makes the meeting, it doesn't go well.
Take a minute, go ahead and send it then. Thank you.
Yeah, give me just a quick second here, and I'll get it sent. So thank you for everybody on the call for being patient. Right.
Mr. Chairman,
Manny,
so this document that we're sending around to everybody on council, is this an executive session confidential document?
No, sir.
no.
Okay, so we're in a public meeting. We're not going to do a screen share. And we've not in any way had this be a public document to either the press or the public.
I could do a screen share, sir. I don't have a problem with that.
Well, I understand it presents a problem in the Zoom screen and the box world of the Zoom screen. But I got a bunch of my colleagues that ran on transparency, carry on about transparency. There are a number of people that ran against colleagues about transparency. Just seems to me like we usually are pretty good at it. This seems like a time to keep being good at it.
Well, all these items will be discussed. There will not be any action taken on them. So it's a work session, so the public will be aware of it before taking action and as we highlight and discuss them.
And I certainly, Mr. Manning, I can put this on the county's website. So that's no problem, sir.
Well, whatever my colleagues in the chair and the vice chair think, I'm just pointing out the issue.
Your point well taken.
All right, I did send that to you, Councilmember Myers, to that Gmail account. Item number 1 was a motion to approve the adjustments to the fiscal year 2021 budget as submitted to council in the recommended budget book received during the week of August 31st, 2020. And that budget book is on the county's website. So citizens could take a look at that, that budget book that I'm recommending that the council approve those adjustments as listed. Those adjustments include 10% budget reductions to many departments that we discussed, as well as county funded organizations. It includes a freeze on hiring on non-essential personnel and a continue to discourage spending on non-essential items. I want to just stop and take a moment to thank the departments for doing a good job of holding the line. You've done that this past fiscal year. I am asking you to do that again this year. It acknowledges that additional budget adjustments may be made based on actual revenue received. Director Ham talked about us being on track, but we certainly will look again later on to determine whether or not we're still on track. And if we're on track, then we may not need to make any additional adjustments. But if things are better, we may be able to come back to the council to make additional adjustments to benefit those departments who have been cut. And if things are worse, we'll be able to come back to the council with that information to determine whether or not adjustments need to be made downward. So we do expect adjustments to be made in the future on some level. And then it acknowledges that the fiscal year 22 budget process will develop an annual budget. And I'm saying that because at this point, with the uncertainty that's circulating, I don't think it would be appropriate to do a biennium budget within a time frame when you have no idea how things are going to shape out. So I think for this next year, we need to develop an annual budget. And if things are, again, are back on target and we're looking solid, we can go back to the biennium budget, but right now I do not believe would be a good decision to do a biennium budget when we're concerned about what's going on in this current year and not really sure about accurate projections. So I'll stop there, Mr. Chair, because that was just item one. Did you want me to allow for questions on any of that?
We can start. Any questions for clarification on item one? Ms. Thracio, do you need to speak? I see your hands up.
Yes, thank you, Mr. I don't want to keep us just on item one.
Break it up.
And
Ms. Thracio, you're breaking up. We can't hear you.
I did, let's see. Is this better, Mr. Chair?
Well, I'm saying you're breaking up. We couldn't hear you.
Okay. I'm going to try different.
That's
How
better.
about this one first? Okay. So could you characterize why we have fewer expenditures than expected for this past fiscal year?
I'm hoping it is in response to the email that I sent out in the memo asking all departments to be cognizant that as stewards of taxpayer dollars, when we know that our businesses, communities are hurting and their revenues are projected to be less, that we needed to hold the line. My understanding is that those departments have responded and done just that. That's all I have as a reason for why the county did not spend 98 to 99% of the dollars, but rather just 91% of budgeted dollars.
Okay. And so I would assume that includes, positions not being filled and that sort of
Yeah.
thing.
Yes, ma'am, you're correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Ms. McBride?
Yeah, I just want to comment on item 1B regarding the freezing of non-essential personnel. Maybe we could put a statement unless there are extenuating circumstances. And if that's the case, with the approval of the council, because we haven't really defined non-essential personnel, and they may be an example or an issue that we might need to hire. So I would just maybe think about including that language.
Yes, ma'am. Ms. McBride, do you mind if I give you a quick update on how that language has been effective this year?
I'm sure that it was. I'm just saying, let there be extenuating circumstances in case we need to do something else.
Right. No, so what's happening right now is that if a department has a person that it needs to hire, then they are still coming to me as the county administrator, making that case for that hire. So we still are doing that, Ms. McBride, but it's just not open season.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, yes, ma'am. Thank you.
You may go ahead, Ms. Byrne.
Thank you. All right. So item number 2, motion to approve the fiscal year 2022 draft budget calendar with corrections. So there are some dates on there. And this is a draft budget calendar. So things certainly can change. But what we wanted to do was allow community partners and departments and county council to prepare for what the budget year will look like, because I plan to have a lot of budget engagement. So there are 2 corrections if this calendar is ultimately approved. There's a February 22nd, should be 2021 date on the second page, but it says 2022, should say 2021. And then there's a April 28, 2019, that should be April 28, 21. So if ultimately the council approves that, and we'll certainly update those corrections, but I wanted to give you a plan for how we would attack the budget process this season. So that's that item, Mr. Chair.
I have one question. You have September 10th and 17th. Now, those are budget work sessions or meetings, because if we expect to take action, let's say, for example, we think there need to be an adjustment or something at that time, a change in the budget. If it's just a work session, we're not being to take action. I guess we can refer it. We can refer it to the next council meeting.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chair, I would say based on what I learned tonight, I think it would be safe for us to call those meetings, and that way, if the council needs to take action, it can take action. And if it chooses not to, it never has to. So I think it would be safer for those to be meetings, giving you the opportunity and members of council to take action if you so choose.
Yeah, those need to be meetings, or if they're not meetings, we have to refer it to the next regular council meeting. So we'll, yeah.
Yes, sir. Those would be meetings.
So we're scratching through, so we're calling, the 10th and 17th meetings instead of work sessions.
Yes, sir.
That clarify my concern then. Okay, good.
Mr. Chair, thank you. All right, sir. If we were to move on to,
Mr. Manning has a question. I'm sorry.
all right.
Man, you recognize.
You're muted, Jim.
Man, you're muted.
I'm sorry, you got me flipping over the email that was sent out this morning and documents there. It says on December 14th or 21st, 2020, FY21 budget update to council. Do we have meetings scheduled for those 2 days? Is that what that's making reference to?
Go ahead, Director Hayes. Would you please respond?
No, Mr. Manning, excuse me, Council Chair, Manning, Council Chair Livingston, may I be recognized?
Yes, please.
Yeah, Mr. Manning, to clarify, to answer your question is, and speaking with the county administrator, he thought it would be good for us to have some dates to give council some updates, just like Director Ham gave updates as it relates to how the budget is trending now. We wanted to be able to give council an update in late December, and then as you'll see another update in February. So those are just milestone dates. I actually had not gotten with the clerk yet to see what's available. So when I was drafting the document yesterday, I chose either the 14th or the 21st because I'm not sure when or if council is meeting on those dates. That's why we turned it draft. But again, those are just milestone dates to give council an update on how we're trending in December and then subsequently February, sir.
So again, is that a meeting or is that just you'll be sending out an email?
It could certainly be either one, Mr. Manning. The bottom line is we are going to provide you with a financial picture of what's going on during those times. So it could be either way, whatever the council's pleasure.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions? Any other questions about the calendar? You may go ahead, Mr. Brown.
Mr. Chair, item 3 is a motion to approve the Safe Voting Plan 2020 grant agreement for the voter registration and elections office. And I'll give you a quick update on that. The voter registrations and elections office, and I do have the director on the call in case members of council have a direct question for that office. Applied for and have received a confirmation that there's an organization who would like to provide them with funding to assist their efforts. We received an agreement. That agreement is directed to the Elections Commission, but then it also references Richland County. I'm working with the county attorney's office to determine whether or not the agreement can be just made directly between voter registrations and elections and the Elections Commission, or if it has to be made with Richland County. If so, we're going to put in language that basically spells out who's responsible for what. But ultimately, I wanted to make sure that the council had an opportunity, if it were the council's responsibility, to weigh in on approving these funds for the voter registrations and elections office. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts of that. And I do again have the voter registration elections office on the line if there are direct questions about the grant or about the information that the grant is supposed to fund.
Anyone have any questions for Mr. Brown? for registration, Director.
Mr. Chair, this is Fiona.
Ma'am.
I have a quick question.
Ms. Myers and then Ms. Malinowski.
So what is the source of funds for this grant?
Yes, ma'am. Director Stevens, did you want to answer that, or do you want me to pull up the document and respond to that?
Well, it's basically, it's a nonprofit organization that's awarding funds to, and I'm sorry, hello, everyone. It's a nonprofit organization that's awarding funds to help prepare elections for 2020. I know Charleston County is included, and there are only 2 counties in South Carolina. They've also done it in Detroit and some other municipalities that were mentioned. I can't think of off the top of my head, but it's a nonprofit organization.
Is it a U.S. I mean, what is the source of funds? So what is the nonprofit and where are they getting their money?
I agree with you, Ms. Myers.
Go ahead, let her answer the question.
Okay, give me 1 second. Do you have the grant pulled up, Mr. Brown?
I have the grant itself pulled up. I don't know if it's going to tell me what Ms. Myers is asking for. She's asking about where does the source of these funds originate from. We have the name of the agency, which is the Center for Technology and Civic Life, but I don't think that's going to answer her question about where the source of those funds originate from.
Okay, I can. It's in an email that was sent to me.
That's sufficient. Thank you. That answers my question. I'll follow up. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Ms. Malinowski, then Ms. Dickerson.
okay.
Ms. Dickerson, you can go ahead. I'll wait.
I just want a follow-up question because, you know, when you mentioned the name, but I didn't catch the name of the organization.
It's
And
called, I'm sorry.
where they're based out of, and I'm curious as to where these funds are coming from as well. So I really need that information. Thank you.
I will get that information and get that information over to Mr. Brown. Will you be able to disseminate that information?
I can.
Mr. Malinowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is, and this may be one for the legal department, whether or not Richland County should even be making this decision, and it should not go to the state, because the state is the one that, in my understanding all these years, totally controls this particular entity, that is the voter registration folks, and that all we do is provide the funding based on what the state tells us to give them. We don't have anything else to do with them. So I don't know, we should start to get involved with approving or disapproving some outside agency that wants to give funds. I think it needs to go to the state and they need to make that decision.
I think I know I talked to Mr. Smith earlier. Mr. Farr might be on the line. He said he might be able to be on this call. And
yeah,
go ahead,
yeah, this is Brad.
Great.
Yep. Yeah, Mr. Malinowski, that's correct. As you'll recall, I guess going back to the 2012 election and some issues that arose from that, you know, people were under the impression that because the Board of Elections and Voter Registration had the words Richland County in it, that it was an entity controlled by Richland County, and it's not. It's a state created and controlled entity. And I prepared like a 60-page, research project that showed all the statutes that talk about the governor appointing upon advice and consent of the legislative delegation, the various members. So it is a state entity. I think the first line of effort would be to ask the state, which I believe Mr. Smith has commenced that dialogue upon getting the email today with the state to see if they'd be willing to accept it. The county's only role to with respect to funding for the election commission is some very limited things relative to supplies and office space and that sort of thing. But so you'd want to find out if the state is willing to accept it. So I think the first thing would be to understand what the timeline is on this. Is it exigent? My understanding is that the funds have to be spent. The grant period expires on the 31st of December. So unless it's something that has to be decided upon, at this meeting, you may want to get an answer to that question first.
Mr. Chair, if I may be recognized, sir.
Yes, and then after you, I have Mr. Rachel, Ms. McBride, and then Livingston. Go ahead, Mr. Brown.
I'll be very brief. I just wanted to say Brad is correct that the expenditure period is December 30th, but the idea is to prepare for the election. So that to me would be the more relative date to consider. It's September now. If you have a November election, then you're really talking about the preparation time between the time the grant is received, if it's ever received, and the money spent to buy the equipment for the election and to set all that stuff out in preparation for the election. That's it, Mr. Chair.
Again, I have Teresa, McBride, and Livingston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to check my audio, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So this is our work session right now, and we're getting information. We've gotten a little bit of information by email. So would this be an action item for our next council meeting?
Yes, it could be.
Okay. And at this point, what would keep it from being on the next agenda? Is there any major, I mean, I think we're all kind of working out any questions that council members might have right now. So I guess my question is, you know, if we are capable of spending this money, and I think that the director has said that could be done, it seems like it would be sooner rather than later to ensure that we can really do everything that we need to do to ensure a free and fair and safe election for everyone. So I don't know if that's a question, I guess.
Well, there's no
yeah.
reason why it couldn't be on next agenda, no.
Okay. And I guess staff is taking notes as to what questions are and can circulate some information for us so that we can be prepared if it does show up before us.
That's the intent of what we're doing now. Yes, I would agree.
Okay, thank you.
I have McBride, Livingston, now.
Mr. Chair, I agree with the legal concerns that council members have, but I would like to echo what Administrator Brown said in terms of this will help with the preparation for election. And I'm sure that I read some of the information that was sent earlier this morning. Given the problems that Richland County had in our last election, that was one of the reasons we were selected. So this is something that's really needed, but we must follow the law. So if we could get this done as soon as possible in terms of the legal liabilities of whether we can do it, it would be most importantly. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a couple quick questions. Have the election board take action on this item? That's for the director.
Yeah. As of right now, no. I told them that they are aware of it, but I told them that Mr. Brown and I had sat down and spoke about it and gone over the guidelines. So they agreed to have him review it first. And he let me know that if it can be accepted by the county, then it will be based upon the county council's decision.
Yeah, and I asked that question because that board appointed by a delegation to make decisions as relates to the voter registration. So I would like for them to have some say so, or at least know what they think about it too, as a governing body. It would be important to me.
Okay.
And also to make sure, I think, and I think what's one good thing about it is, and we need to make sure everybody's aware of it, and that is the use of the funds. So I think that's important to make sure that's very clear too. I mean, I have that 100%. I think that's important. And then on the obvious, I have it been already addressed, and that is make sure it's something that we can legally do. Thank you.
Okay.
It's Mount Ashland.
I'm fine, Mr. Chair. I put my hand down. Ms. McBride said what my concerns were. Thank you, Ms. McBride.
Thank you. Mr. Ratio, your hand's still up, or you have another question?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually have a new question at this point. My question is, I guess, directed toward the Director Stevens. So council members do have concerns about the legal, how this all works legally. My question is for the director. Have you had any legal opinions offered to you as to how this can all work legally? Any opinions or any counsel on that?
Not as of yet, no.
Okay, thank you. And from this nonprofit, have you had any communication, legal communications from them as to how this all works with the county?
They did send me information on how it works legally, and I shared that information with Mr. Brown. Have you had a chance to look over that?
The
It's in
second-
our package.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, he sent us what he yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's the only information that they have provided to me thus far. But I am going to follow up with you all with the information that you're requesting.
Thank you. And so hopefully that information would get also shared with the county legal department, just so we can, I guess, close
Okay.
all the loops there,
Okay,
if that hasn't already. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Malinowski?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't want Director Stevens to overlook the fact, as it was mentioned by Attorney Farah, that this is a state-created and controlled entity, your elections department there. And that while I'm hearing a lot of Mr. Brown's got this and Mr. Brown's got that, and the county legal department has this and that, I really think you need to get moving and get that over to the state level so that they can have their input on it. Thank you.
okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Ms. Myers?
Yes, sir. Let's just make one comment. I mean, I agree with Mr. Fair. I respect what he said. But I'd also note that, yes, this is definitely an area that we don't control, but we do fund it. And when things fall down, it comes back to the Richland County coffers to figure out how to find the money. The state generally relies on us for that. So I'm concerned to be sure that going into this, while absolutely we do not control or appoint any of these people, I think we all well understand that. I think it is important for us to understand the source of funds, what use is spending made of the funds, and if it is legal for us to appropriate these funds, because they will come through us to the voter registration board. And so to the extent that we have to take that action, I'd just like to be sure that everything we're doing is blessed by our legal department and that we understand what we're voting on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Manning, then Mr. Farrer, and Mr. Rachel. Is your hand up again?
It is. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, could I let the attorney go before me?
Can you to the attorney, Mr. Farrer? Ms. Farrer, you recognize.
Brad,
Hello,
are you there?
Mr. Yeah, right.
I'll go, Mr. Chair.
All right.
I do want to say to Ms. Stevens, I really appreciate you being in a position to find this possibility and bring it to us, because anything and everything, of course, we need to make sure that we do it legitimately, but just very excited that you've brought to our attention the possibility of bringing additional resources for our elections in Richland County to go in a very good kind of way. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Rachel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess my question is, if Richland County is the funding entity for the elections department, regardless of, state control of who names the board, et cetera, is there any limit to how much we can fund the elections department? I mean, I suppose that there's a recommended amount, and then there's the amount that the state refunds us for holding elections. But, if we wanted to fund at any level, are we limited?
Not that I'm aware of. I was going to come from legal.
Yeah, I mean, I can answer that. No, there's no limitation on you can give us as much money as you want to.
Thank you.
Now that's a different question than how much you have to give them, but that's the answer.
Okay, thank you. So extra money that would come in could be allocated there without any limitation.
Yeah, again, if that's to me, that you can. What you kind of want to make sure that when you do that, you just make sure people understand that who is responsible for conducting the election. So if you take the grant money, you want to do it as a pass through. Otherwise, you don't want folks saying, "Well, wait a second, now you, Richland County, are in charge of administering the grant." And so that's one of the concerns you would have. But the due diligence on this is really straightforward. It's basically, as Ms. Myers said, find out where the money's coming from. Second is, why can't the state pass it through? And third, if the county passes through, you just put appropriate language in the cover letter that basically says, we're happy to, pass this through to you, and good luck with your election. Thanks for all you do. And that's all you have to say, because they still control it. But that would be the 3-tier approach. Where is it coming from? Why can't the state take it? And then if not that, then we just caveat the letter of acceptance.
Right. And, presumably we could answer question 1 pretty quickly. Presumably question 2 may take some time. So it seems like it might be prudent to just ensure that, Richland County could be an effective pass-through entity and allow the elections department to run as smoothly as possible.
Again, this is Brad. If I may, yes, Mr. Ocean, I've actually already drafted the acceptance letter on behalf of the county.
Thank you, Mr. Farrar.
Ms. McBride?
I was just going to agree with Mr. Ratio on that issue. And I'm not sure that Ms. Myers said that it had issue. Did you say that, Ms. Myers?
You're not sure that I said what, ma'am?
I wasn't sure that you implied that it should go through the state or not. I wasn't sure that.
Oh, no, not at all. No, ma'am.
Thanks, though.
No, ma'am. I was not implying that at all. Thank you, Ms. McBride.
Thank you. In wrapping this up, we'll gather all the information that we're talking about here, and as necessary, we'll add it to our next council agenda. Mr. Brown, next item?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. So the next item, item 4, it is a 2-part or either or item. It says a motion to require requests for budget transfers that come from operating expenses and go to personnel expenses to be specifically approved by council, and or as an alternative motion, designate that budget transfers from operating expenses to personnel expenses will be treated as one-time payouts subject to the availability of funds within the requesting department's budget. And I'll tell you exactly what I'm trying to accomplish with that in terms of helping departments make sure they are fiscally sound with their budgetary decisions. Operating dollars, as you are well aware of, are not guaranteed dollars. The council from year to year determines whether or not they will fund certain amounts. Personnel dollars are reoccurring expenses. So you routinely don't increase and decrease a person's salary year to year. So taking dollars from one pot and moving them to the other that we're as described here creates a problem because the county budget automatically is inflated if you take operating dollars and move them to personnel and expect that those same dollars in personnel will be there next year, and you can then ask for operating dollars as well. So again, that's certainly an item that the council would need to discuss, but good business practice, good accounting practice, you don't make that transaction. So certainly we'll take any questions on that item, Mr. Chair, members of council.
All right, you heard the administrator reference that item 4. Any particular questions come to mind from my colleagues? Ms. McBride, you recognize. Ms. McBride, you recognize.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Generally, when you change it from one budget item to another, you can go up to 10%. Is that not included when you're talking about your personnel and operating expenses?
You normally don't mix those funds. You can have.
They mix them. I said you can change, you can get a 10% change in them.
I don't understand the question. I'm not familiar with that.
Okay, in some budget items, you can use 10%. You can go up to 10% and change in your budget items, your categories. That's not the case with the personnel. If you want to use 10% of your operating budget and put it in personnel, you can change it without permission. And a lot of entities have that.
If you allow that, yes, ma'am, there's nothing that says you can't do it, but you cannot effectively budget for that, because what's happening is if every department, let me not do that.
Because this is not, go ahead. It's not something that's going to be done all the time, and then you get, okay, go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. You hope it doesn't happen all the time, but if it becomes an allowable and a routine practice, then there's nothing preventing from happening all the time.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to prevent.
Yeah, I'm saying 10%. But anyway, when you say department, what are you talking about? Departments within county government, or what do you mean by department?
Yes, ma'am. I mean, from a budgetary standpoint, that every department that the county council has budgetary authority over, from a policy position, that's what I'm referring to.
Okay, are you talking about external county agencies, or are you talking about within county? Within
Richland County.
Mm-hmm. Are you talking about elected officials' budgets, the sheriff's?
All budgets that the council has policy decision-making business over.
Okay, I think we need to have some more discussion on that. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Any further discussion, reference item 4?
Mr. Chair, this is Delia.
Mike, you recognize.
Mr. Brown, I'd just like to commend you for pointing this out, because Mr. Jackson isn't here, but for many years, this has been something that he was deeply concerned about. He and I discussed it a lot, about the fact that we didn't have a clear-eyed ability to look at the budget because of just what you pointed out, because one pot was used to increase the other without direct authorization, and therefore the budget year over year increased under our feet without the county council effectively voting on it and letting the public know that these departmental budgets were increasing in that way. So I think this is helpful. I agree with Ms. McBride that insofar as the elected officials, there may need to be some policy discussion of what a reasonable variance would be. But I thank you for pointing this out, because it really is a way of secretly inflating a budget, increasing a budget without direct authorization or need for direct authorization. So thank you for that.
Yes, ma'am.
And it's not, we're not saying it couldn't be. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Ms. McBride. Go ahead.
Just to follow up, I was not speaking about the county government departments that you're responsible for, Mr. Brown. But in law, we need to look at the law, because the law gives certain elected officials that are over agencies that authority. Now, we can check the amount, but in terms of telling them where they can move it, that's another thing. So that's why I'm thinking that's a legal issue that has to be addressed by legal.
Yes, ma'am. I understood, Ms. McBride. I certainly respect that. And just for your awareness, I have had conversations with at least a couple of elected officials, and just share with them that I was going to present this information. So this is not, I'm not blindsiding anybody, or this is not about calling anybody out. This is just about general standard accounting practices that deal with moving funds between certain categories. So, but yes, ma'am, you're right. We can get with legal, but it's just a conversation about how to better budget. That's what I'm trying to put forward tonight.
And I understand that very well, Mr. Brown, because I've done a lot of governmental budgeting. But I do know that there are some legal ramifications regarding certain agencies. Thank you.
Good. Yes, ma'am. Don't want to cross any legal lines.
And Mr. Brown, I think, and we're saying not that it can't be done, you simply said it would require council approval.
I'm not even saying it will require council approval. So you could, okay, I don't want to get in legal lines, but my understanding is that the county, from a budgetary standpoint, can set budgetary policy. Okay, so part of your answer is, Mr. Livingston, you could do that potentially. My thought is simply, if that transfer is to be made, it really goes through the process where it's visible. It's a visible process, because when the council approves a budget in its totality between operating and personnel, you assign amounts to those individual line items. So based on my view of the matter, if a department is operating within each fund separately, that's fine. But when you start crossing funds, I think it's important that the council is just aware that the needs have changed. And that way, when you budget the next year, you can be aware that it may not be necessary for this amount to be X or Y because of the budget transfer. Because in essence, what you're saying is, I didn't need money here, I needed money there. Well, the council needs to know that so they can budget better in one category versus another category. So that's kind of where I'm going, Mr. Livingston.
All right, thank you.
Just to sum it up, Mr. Chair, if you gave an agency $1,000 and you told them this is your $1,000, then you budget how best it fits your agency. So if they want to move something from one line item to another, the thing is that they can't go over that $1,000, and that's what they're going to be responsible for. So that's my issue. We can't dictate to them how they budget, but they can't go over that $1,000. So, but anyway, we're just discussing, so it's a work session, so we have plenty of time for further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion, questions? If not, that brings us to item 5.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I do have item 5 and then before we get done with that one, I do have one more item, but item 5 is consider the request for assistance from Riverbank Zoo. We do have the president and CEO of Riverbank Zoo on the call, Mr. Stringfellow. So Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, members of council, if we can allow him to elaborate on that request for the council to consider.
Go ahead, Mr. Stringfellow.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the council. I appreciate the opportunity to look at this request. As everybody else, it's been a tough year so far, and springtime is when we generally make about 40% of our revenue. That revenue allows us to carry expenses through the winter time when things are slower. We, like you guys, have a operating reserve that we set aside that, obviously for needs. If a hurricane got us, we can continue paying animal expenses and necessary staff expenses. We've had to use that operating expense for the 3 months that we were closed, and we're pretty close to running out of that operating reserve. Now, kind of good news is we're starting to see a little more uptick in attendance, and hopefully we'll see some of the restrictions on us for allowing more attendance as COVID hopefully goes away. We'll start generating the revenue we need to cover the costs as we move forward. But our concern is we always use that operating reserve in the winter months of November through February to continue paying expenses until the spring comes and the crowds come back. As we head to the winter, we won't have that operating expense. And my request is not asking for more monies, as much as I'd love to. It is the amount that you guys had approved fund us this year, the possibility of forwarding or fronting or advancing a good portion of it for us to use over the winter. If I look at over the past years of how the funds come to us, about 80% of the funds that you guys give us are, I believe, collected or paid to us in the February, March, April period, obviously. And at that point, we may be in worse shape going through the winter. Is it possible to shift some of that into the next month or two, if not half of it or more? Is that possible to make sure that we are paying the expenses through the winter? I'm asking this same request from Lexington County as well. We're meeting with them next week. They seem to think that's possible, but I think they needed to work with their finance committee to see if that's something that can be done.
Okay, I have a Manning for a question in Livingston.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Stringfellow, the firm that the county hired to help us look at this in terms of disaster and federal funding, were they helpful in working with you and able to help you secure any funding through their avenues?
No, sir. Sadly, we are one of the entities that aren't eligible for any type of funding assistance. We're one of the special purpose districts classified as I think a 501c1 and not eligible for any of the CARES Act state or federal money at this point in time. But we are continually trying to skirt around that or figure out how we can qualify. But at this point, we have not received any additional funding.
Okay, is that firm helping you to find other ways? That was part of my understanding why we hired them.
I haven't talked to them directly, Mr. Manning, but I know we're working with some groups that hopefully they can find legally a way that would allow us to participate. But at this point, we hadn't made any headway with them.
Well, I just want to say I'm very, very concerned that there hadn't been that connection made. And because again, that was the kind of thing that I thought why we went out, procured those people to help in our COVID situation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, fella. One thing I think that makes your situation rather unique, and many of my colleagues may not be aware of it. So can you just tell us how dependent you are on ticket revenue in terms of what percent of your budget is affected by that?
Yes, sir. Our total budget, 80% of what we use to pay expenses and to build our reserve comes from ticket sales and in-park spending. Obviously we have the society who we lean on a lot for donations, and they're working hard for extra requests for assistance. So 80% of that comes through that avenue. And then obviously 20% comes from both you and Lexington County. And you guys are strong and appreciate the funds that you guys voted to approve. That's definitely helping. Unfortunately, we're held right now to 30% of attendance by the governor due to the proper spacing and CDC. So getting only 30% of our attendance coming in the gates, not covering the monthly bills. And so using that revenue account, reserve account has been what we've been depending on. Do see that starting to change. I hope that'll change faster than we hope. But that's where we get the bulk of the operating revenue to pay the bills. And you know what some people don't remember is the animal collection we have. I can't furlough animals. They have to be fed, and the veterinary care bills, and that's the bulk of our expenses. And whether we're closed or not, those bills still are being paid. We've done everything we can to furlough and cut and reduce our expenses, just like you guys have, putting a freeze on everything just to ensure we can get through the winter.
Yeah, I just want to make the point that in terms of the uniqueness of your having to depend so much on ticket sales relative to most other entities. That's one point I made. Let Ms. McBride and
Malinowski was next.
Malinowski, look like her hand went down there. Malinowski, you go ahead.
Well, I was going to wait for everyone else. I just wanted to make sure, again, to me, this is another legal question that we have to make sure we can legally do this. And maybe Mr. Brown or our somebody else can even answer that now so that we can get it on the agenda and make that decision. Thank you, Ms. McBride.
Mr. Chair, to Mr. Malinowski's question, I know I do have a few people who communicated to me a process that the county participated in. I don't know which entity it was with, but my understanding is that there has been a process in the past in which the county did advance some funding and then required that funding to be paid back through the collection of the revenue that was received. So I'm not sure if Director Hayes or Director Ham could speak to that, but that is something that has taken place at least at some point in time in Richland County's history.
Yeah, I did mention that to you, Mr. Brown. I do recall when the library was making transition, a lot of new libraries and so forth. I remember doing that with the library at one point, fronting them the money so that they could get ahead of some of the things they were doing because of their transition.
I think
that's one of the times that stand out to me.
Okay. Director Ham, did you want to provide some more additional information for the council's benefit, please?
Yes, this is Director Ham, Director of Finance. Yes, that was true, what Mr. Chairman Livingston said. We have done that with the library in the past, back when we used to get bond tax anticipation notes, and they received some funds from that, and we quit getting that, but they still needed additional funds before the tax dollars came in. So we did a promissory note to them to advance tax. So it's basically like a tax anticipation note that the county was providing ourselves, so to the library. And that's how we did it before.
McBride and Ms. Newton.
Mr. Stringfellow, first of all, I just want to thank you and the staff for the work that you do at Riverbank Zoo. And it's a great asset to Richland County. I fully support this if we can legally do it. My question is regarding, and Mr. Livingston or maybe the budget person can help, with the hospitality taxes, which is a different question. But I know that if we could use that in some way because of the kids are in school, and a way to ensure more people are watching it or taking part in the zoo, if we could find a way, is it possible to use, which is a separate question from your issue, Mr. Stringfellow, the hospitality funds to help with that and getting more people to, if we have to do virtual programs or educational programs or what, but you're still bringing people to Richland County in terms of looking at it virtually.
I think part of the limit too, though, is you have the government has a limit on the number of attendees, so you can't increase it beyond that point.
Yeah, but I'm not saying okay, because the hospitality will relate back to on-site. Okay. Yeah, I was just thinking about the advertising and not the on-site, the virtual visitation, which would still be publicity for the county, but I'm following you. Just trying to think something innovative to do.
Yeah. If it helps, Ms. McBride, we are trying to figure out how we can Zoom into classrooms. We know schools won't be coming back to the zoo this year like they have in the past, and it may change forever. You never know, but we are looking for outreach ways virtually or even in person where we can go out to the schools that have programs that or education pieces that we can fulfill. So we're looking for ways and creative ways we can get into those schools as well.
And I was just trying to find a way to help.
Thank you.
Ms. Newton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And you've already addressed part of my question from Mr. Malinowski in terms of what our legal options are. So thanks for that. And thanks for all that you do at the zoo. It is, I think, one of our number one tourist attractions here, and we're glad to have you here in Richland County. I guess one of my questions is more directed to staff, and I don't want to derail this conversation, so it might be something we can take up later. But my understanding was that our agreement with Tetra Tech was to search for funding for Richland County and not necessarily some of our outside agencies. And so my question would be, is that really part of the scope of the agreement? If it's not, if that's something that we want to add or do, we certainly can. But I guess if we're questioning that contract, I was never under the impression that that's what it was supposed to do. So I just wanted to be clear on that.
Yes, ma'am, Ms. Newton. This is Leonardo Brown. You're correct. It was not my understanding that Tetra Tech would be facilitating agencies that are not Richland County.
Okay, thank you.
No other questions?
Mr. Chair? Yes, may I
Mike.
follow up, please?
You recognize Ms. Mike?
Mr. Brown, this is to your comment just now. Can you elaborate just a bit? Because I thought that the Tetra Tech's responsibility was to assist Richland County in finding and aggressively going after sources of federal funding that could ameliorate some of the COVID-19 strains on our budget. I didn't know that we specifically excluded agencies like the zoo. That would strike me as odd as well. Can you please elaborate?
I'm not sure if I can elaborate. I guess and this may be a bad example, but we were just discussing a few moments ago voter registration and elections and how they were a separate entity from Richland County, even though they have a Richland County moniker. And I would equate that to this situation where even though we have a partner, which is the Riverbank Zoo, which we certainly, want to try to help, which is why I'm bringing it before the council tonight, that help would not necessarily come from a contractor that Richland County hired to help acquire funds to offset any concerns that Richland County was experiencing from COVID-19. So beyond that, I don't know if I can elaborate better, Ms. Myers. That was just my understanding.
Thank you, sir. I accept your explanation and appreciate it. As a follow-up after this meeting or at some point, would you send me just a copy of what it is, the scope of work and the contract that we engaged Tetra Tech under?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. So, Mr. Brown, at this point,
Yes, sir.
some guidance in terms of where we need to move as it relates to the zoo. Do staff have any recommendation on it? Or how do we want to proceed?
It sounds like from what I'm hearing that the council is interested in pursuing the ability for us to do that. So I think with hearing that, we can work with, our previous, like I said, to see if the previous opportunity that was used with the library will work in this situation. We'll get with legal. And then the next part of that is we'll determine how much the county can do that and maybe in what steps. So Mr. Stringfellow did say, something like if possible, maybe half, if not more, to determine, when the county could do that. So that would be the next step, Mr. Chair. And I believe we should hopefully be able to have an answer for you by the next time the council meets on the 15th. I believe that's the date you meet.
That'd be my recommendation.
And Mr. Chair, this is Jim Manning. I'll absolutely bring the motion. So yes, Mr. Brown, there is an interest in making sure that we have all the information, if that's possible to do, please.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Manning.
Malinowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one last item that I'm thinking of as we're talking here, that we probably need to make sure that whatever document is written up in this, that we use, we create the proper wording to show that this is a very special circumstance to the exclusion of other entities who are next all going to be lining up saying, well, we're short of funding too, and we want our money in advance. The next thing that everybody we give funding to is going to be asking for money up front. So I think we need to just be cautious there too. Thank you.
More, thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Ms. Knight?
we could add a sentence that they all have to have animals to be fed.
Y'all are mess. All right.
They'll all have a mascot at the end.
All right, we better move on off of that one. I think we've taken care of that one.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. You're quite welcome.
All right, Mr. Chair, I have one more item. I know it's not on the document, but I did receive a request and I had a conversation with the Richland County Sheriff's Department, Chief Cowan, about some items that were listed in the budget book. We listed those as requests that were made, but we did not list those as approved items. So Mr. Cowan wanted the opportunity to address some information with you, Mr. Chair, and members of the council related to the budget.
Thank you. Ms. Cowan, we recognize.
Which category are we talking about, Mr. Brown?
You can, Mr. Chief, you can, I think what you can do is, quite frankly, sir, because this is a budget work session, I think you can really just start with the victims assistance, the school resource, anywhere you need to go in that process, because right now it's just a work session and the council is not taking any official action on tonight.
Okay. Well, I'll start with victim services. As many of you may remember, there was some action taken by council during the last biennium that specifically did not cover the salaries associated with victim services. That action actually reduced the sheriff's budget. And now consequently, we're in a situation where going into the next budget year, we will be short in salaries and victim services by $153,390. So we're asking council to reconsider that action and moving forward to make sure that the salary items are covered within the sheriff's budget, commensurate with the positions that already exist and commensurate with the personnel that are already in place, that were in place at the time the action occurred.
I don't know if the National College have any questions or clarification on this item. Mr. Scott, Mr. Mount, go ahead.
Yeah, Chief Cowan, and I believe you've explained it before, maybe at a council meeting, but if you could again explain, the council has a limit as to the amount of funding that would be paid to victim services, because it kept going up and up every year. And finally, one of those years, the council said, we're going to draw the line in the sand here and won't pay any more than this dollar amount. Do you or Mr. Brown, do you recall that dollar amount?
I don't recall the cap. Director Hayes may be able to tell you the cap. I know that we contribute $248,000 annually from our special duty program towards that pot of money. But I don't know who could answer the cap question. I apologize.
Yes, sir, Chief, no problem. Mr. Malinowski, Director Hayes can answer that question, sir. Director Hayes?
Yeah, it's $686,021. That's the budgeted transfer out from the general fund to victim assistance.
Okay, with that dollar amount, then does this 150,000 put us over that?
Hear the answer to Mr. Malinowski's question, Mr. Chair.
Well, I'm waiting on.
Can you not hear me?
I'm sorry.
Mr. Chair, the answer is yes. It would be an additional amount, which is what Chief Cowan is saying, is that amount was not approved originally because the council took action to limit the funding.
Then it seems to me somewhere along the line that victim services would have to adjust their overall complement of personnel in order to come within that cap.
Well, respectfully, Mr. Malinowski, for the last several years, that amount has gradually been reduced, but we've continued to provide increased services. And these are positions that occurred prior to that decision being made to reduce the amount of money placed into those accounts. So those positions and those salaries occurred prior to the action being taken during the last biennium.
That action, to my recollection, Chief, took place well before we began biennium budgets, that $680,000 cap.
The decision that impacted us, sir, was learned during the last biennium.
Mr. Chair, when you finish with Mr. Malinowski.
I have Ms. Newton had her hand up and then Ms. Dickerson.
Okay, I'm fine.
Go ahead, Mr. Chair, I'll yield for now.
Ms. Newton, then Ms. Dickerson.
I'm happy to wait for Ms. Dickerson. My question might be better after hers.
No, I'll be happy to wait for yours because you might ask the question that I have. So you may go ahead. I don't want to jump in front of you.
Newton, you recognize.
Yeah. Thank you, Ms. Dickerson. Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, my question is just, I know that we have a letter from Chief Kellen in our email, but I would appreciate some additional background documentation, just clarifying how this situation came to be. I know that it would take a long time for us to do it here, but I just would request that additional documentation. That's all. Thank you.
Okay. It's me now, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Ms. Dixon, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, and Major Chief. I can't keep up with your titles, but I have to agree with Mr. Malinowski. I can remember basically for the past almost 10 years, we've been struggling with this issue. And if there are significant changes, I certainly would like to see a comparison as to, I hate to do it, but for like maybe a 5-year comparison before the biannual budget, because we set a cap of this was getting out of hand. And I do think that probably some ways that this probably need to figure out a way to kind of reduce it, because I think if Mr. Malinowski can remember, we did set, and Mr. Chair, we did set a limit on this, and that you all were supposed to work within that budget. And so if there was to be an increase, then I think you should show us how and how you would justify that. Thank you. That may not be what you want, but that's what I'd like to see, because this budget continues to get out of hand. Thank you.
Mr. Hayes, just for a little history for councilors who've been around a little less than I have. Explain in terms of where those funds originally came from. In other words, remember how those victim assistance funds were generated before we start supplementing funds from the budget, general fund budget.
Yes, sir. Can you hear me? Council? Yeah. So victim assistance has basically 2 pots of money. They have some fees and fines, a revenue.
Whoever's speaking, I can't hear.
Okay, can you hear me now, Councilwoman Dickerson?
Dickerson, you're not on mute, are you? Because we can hear.
Okay.
All right, we're good.
I'll start over again. Yeah, the Victim Assistance Fund, which just for clarification, actually had 4 departments, and it's not just the Sheriff Department, but the Sheriff Department, Detention Center, Court Administrator, and Solicitor. Those 4 departments comprise the Victim Assistance Fund. Their 2 primary sources of funding are they have fees and fines, and then they have a transfer out from the general fund. So those are the 2 sources of funding. When we presented the biennium—
Just for correction, Mr. Hayes, it started out with, remember now, it started out with just those funds that were collected. It didn't start out within a general fund appropriation.
Well, that's correct, sir. Yeah, but I was just giving you that's correct.
That's right, Mr. Chair, thank you.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, that's what I had, sir. I'm just answering that they have 2 sources of funding: the fees and fines, and then of course the $686,000 transfer that you all capped a few years back, sir.
James, there's a third source of funding, which is the special duty program, which kicks in almost $250,000 as well.
What's the special duty, Mr. What is your title? Major, chief, whatever, what is it?
Chief, ma'am.
Okay, Chief Calvin, what did you say? Can you repeat that last thing so I can ask my question again?
When deputies go out and work special duty, they go out and work for a vendor like a bank or a program, the state fair or whatever, when they provide a special duty, a special service, and that entity pays the county, there's a part of the money for that hourly service that goes directly to support victim services.
Mr. Hayes?
I'm sorry, Chair Livingston, what was your question? I'm sorry.
Now that, were you finished with the explanation of the funding? Now,
Mr. Chair, I have a question. Chief Calvin brought up you said when you go out to provide services, can you explain what you just said? Because I really didn't understand it. I mean, so is that a deputy or, I mean, what staff members are required to go to these special places that you all are sending them to, that they pay, that they appropriate funds for or give us funds for? Can you help me with that? Because I'm just not understanding that part.
Yes, ma'am. Y'all approve every year. You approve a program called Special Duty, and what happens is a deputy will go out, for example, the USC football game or the state fair or a high school football game, and those entities, instead of using tax dollars to pay that service, we charge them an hourly rate, and there's an administrative fee that goes along with that covers the salary. It covers, it covers gasoline, it covers the use of the vehicle, and that money goes to the county along with money that goes to support the victim services program.
So that helps reduce the amount that you all are asking for? How does that contribute to that?
Well, that goes towards helping pay that cost.
Okay.
and I think the big question for council is, we can talk about how we fund it, but is that could be more important than the service that we want to provide. In other words, the option is if you don't supplement it with the general fund, then you don't have a victim assistance program. So the choice is whether we, have a vibrant victim assistance program or not, and to do so based on the recommendations it's going to require a continuation of funding from general fund.
Mr. Chair, I'm not saying that we don't need the services. I'm just saying that we need to stay within the budget and the guidelines that is set, because we, according to the years that I've served on this council, we set a minimum, and I think we need to, that needs to be adhered to. And that's where I stand on this. Thank you.
Again, the main thing, Bill, might should go ahead.
Go ahead, Mr. Livingston, I'll wait for you.
The most main concern here is for us to have this discussion about it now, so that way, when this item come up on our agenda at our next meeting, then we'll know, we'll have our questions answered and so forth, or we have questions after an item, we'll make sure we have answers. So we won't have to worry about getting more information as we make a decision. And we'll have to put it off any longer. And Ms. Malachi, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I agree with what Councilwoman Dickerson just said. The council has set a maximum dollar amount. It doesn't, to me at this point, make any difference where the other monies come from or how much money is coming in. The fact remains that we have set a dollar amount that we're willing to put in toward the program. If they need more funds and the funds can't be collected from wherever else they're coming from, then maybe somebody needs to take a good hard look at the program and have it audited and find out, is everything that's being used or asked for truly needed, just like what Administrator Brown is doing with the county departments. Thank you.
I agree, Mr. Malinowski. Thank you.
Any further questions and clarification on this item? If not, please continue to ask questions about it. This is an item that we'll take action on when we can at our meeting. If you have a question about this, we'll go to the next one.
Next, we actually had a discussion today, Mr. Brown, Director Hayes, myself and Dr. Thompson. There were some other items listed in the memo that I sent to you that we believe we found some resolution collectively as a team to deal with. So one of the largest items on there were some items that were out of our operational that we've not had covered in the past. We believe we found a solution to do that. So we're good there. The issue, the next issue on the table is the school resource officer program. We've got requesting an approval amount going forward. We're passing those expenses on to the school districts in the MOUs. And we're asking for council during the second and third reading to approve those increased amounts that will become budgetary, will become basically net neutral, as Mr. Brown explains, but will in the end impact the budget initially, and then we'll be taking in reimbursements for that increase.
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Ms. Myers and Ms. Malinowski.
Chief Cowan, how has the closing of some of the schools because of COVID, the delayed openings and all of that, has that impacted the budget at all? And are there any things that are going to be realized from that? Because there are a lot of schools, obviously they won't have children there, so the school resource officers are there to assist with obviously working with the young people. If they're not there, are there any cost savings that will be realized?
The school resource officers are all dedicated to all the schools in Richland County. There's staff at the schools, and the SROs are working with the staff as well as working with the children that are attending some schools and the children in the community. So they are still working their full schedules in the schools, within the schools, with the children and the staff.
So even where there are no students at the schools, they're still doing the same thing. I guess I'm not. Can you just explain to me how the model has changed to match, I guess, the times where we are right now with COVID?
Well, there's some schools that actually have children in them, and most all schools have got staff in them. So the SROs are indeed working in all of the schools in Richland County.
I can take my other questions offline with you, Chief Cowan. I just need a better understanding of what the program is, given that, literally most of the children are, I know 3 in particular who are at home, so, and their schools are closed. So, okay, thank you.
I'm asking.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chief Cowan, I don't need this info right now, but on the resource officers in that little budget book that we were just recently provided, and it breaks down school district 1, 2, Lexington, Richland, 5 in there. Could you please provide how many schools that are being handled in each one of those groups, please?
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, those were, if you're looking for me, I thought you were waiting on somebody else, but those are the items we specifically had worked with Mr. Brown and his staff on bringing you up to speed on.
All right, Mr. Chair.
Let me ask a quick, you finna respond to Mr. Brown on something?
No, sir, I thought you were waiting for me to wrap up or something, got
No,
quiet.
just before you,
Wrap up.
I have a question before you wrap up of Ms. Chief Cowan. What is the difference you're referencing in the dollar amount regarding special, the special resource officers? The difference in the dollar amount from last year's budget and this year's budget, is it, you know what that difference is? Based on your request?
Director Hayes, do you have that in front of you?
No, that's what I was asking, unfortunately.
No, Director Hayes, do you have that in front of you?
Based off the county, the budget for victim, for SR.
No, resource officers.
You hear me? Chair,
Yes.
Yeah, the budget for FY20 was 6.1 million. 4.5 of that was revenue, and roughly 1.5 was for the general fund. And just based off the 6.3 that the department is at, the 6.3 that I'm aware of, the 6.3 request for FY21, the revenue would be 4.8 from the schools, and then about 1.5 from the general funds kicking in. So last year was 6.1, this year was 6.3.
And we're talking about the same amount from the general fund as it was last year?
Roughly, yes, sir.
Roughly, okay.
I think last year exactly was 1,455,000, and this year 1,517,000. So basically 1.5. That's correct.
What other questions, Mr. Farr? You sit on the line?
I am, yes, sir.
If with the school resource officers, now that since that's part of the sheriff's budget, if we increase those and something miraculous happen and we come up with this great way of providing something else for schools or whatever, we cannot decrease them by the law based on the information you sent me. How would that work?
Yeah, so the kind of the lines of demarcation here is the council approves the overall budget amount. I think Ms. McBride was kind of alluding to this earlier in the meeting. And then within that, the elected officials, so in this case, the sheriff, carries out the missions of that particular office. So where you see Attorney General's opinions and cases on this is, the governing body is precluded from taking an action that would have the effect of reducing the sheriff's law enforcement capacity.
But Brad, I apologize. Let me ask you a question different way because I didn't ask the question as cleanly as I need to have asked it. Let's assume that a school district decides and come up with this very creative way of dealing with what these officers do and decide they don't need these officers anymore. We cannot not fund those, can we?
Yeah, that would go back to whether that decreases the mission of the sheriff. So if that mission is decreased, that's an interesting scenario because that wouldn't necessarily be the same as taking away the number of deputies that he has to do his overall mission. So that's an interesting question. I mean, as long as it doesn't if the mission is decreasing, then that wouldn't necessarily trigger the prohibition on reducing the budget. So that's a complicated one. But you're right. If the mission goes away, that would be different than just reducing the budget generally.
Okay, I just thought from reading the information you sent, I just had to ask you that question. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a complex issue, but yeah, it's a good question. Good question, sir. Thank you.
Any other questions come to mind about victims, about the school resource officers? Ms. McBride.
Chair, I have basically been a supporter for school resource officers, but at the same time, I've been a supporter for counselors and nurses and social workers. And from a philosophical point of view, as well as from a social service point of view, I would like to see as much emphasis placed on
having school resource officers as us having school nurses, social workers and counselors, and even more so now, given COVID-19 and the issues these young people are facing. At home, you find domestic violence, child abuse rates are up, and these kids are dealing with depression and all types of mental health issues. So when the schools need to look at providing other social services, as well as the council, we need to look into making sure that in addition to law enforcement, we are providing the social service, mental health, and physical health needs of young people. Just wanted to make that statement.
I have Malinowski and Teresa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I believe we touched on this before at council meetings, but what is the legality? Maybe Mr. Farrar can answer, maybe Chief Cowan can, but what's the legality of taxpayer money going toward paying a school resource officer for a private school? And I'm referring to the Heathwood Hall Academy. Heathwood Academy.
Big issue last year.
I'll ask legal to give it a shot.
Yeah, I don't, that specific program. So yeah, so if you're providing the same level of security, I don't know that the private nature of it necessarily invalidates it. I mean, you're talking about security of the children and the students in the community. So it's the fact that it's private wouldn't necessarily disqualify it. I've not been asked that question, but I mean, that would be my initial thought on it.
I didn't think we were spending the general fund money there. Is that the case?
Yeah, if it's coming back from that source that Chief was talking about earlier about the special duty type thing, then that would be a caveat as well.
No, there is a split between the school and the county. There's a percentage split between Heathwood and the county as far as the overall cost of having that SRO there, yes.
Mr. Farrar, what you're saying is every private school in Richland County can come forward and ask for the same thing?
Yeah, I mean, I would think, you would get into an equal protection situation if you differentiated, just simply based on one private school versus another. So, I don't know what the demand is, if that's been asked, but yeah, as a general matter, if they're all meeting the standards and qualifications for a, education program, then yeah, I would think they'd have equal fair footing to at least make the request.
Yeah.
Mr. Ratio?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to echo what Ms. McBride said in concern about how we're allocating resources to support for students, particularly during this time. I think now that we have, in so many ways, things have been sort of taken to the ground. This is an opportunity to re-envision and look at how we would like to create the world that we want to live in. So I think this is an opportunity to think about how we're spending funds and look at ways to support the health of our students in other ways.
Anyone else on the issue dealing with school resource officers? So what will be before us at our council meeting will be the request to fund them based on these recommendations as been made with the schools. Any further questions? If not, Mr. Cowan, you have something else?
No, sir, Mr. Chair. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chair.
Ms. Dickerson, then Mr. Brown.
Okay, first of all, Chief Cowan, I just want to thank you for your work, and I'm not trying to be a devil's advocate or anything. I'm just trying to make sure that we try to keep a good budget. I think we should provide good community services. I am
Yes.
all for that. I'm not against it. I just think that we also have a responsibility to the taxpayers to make sure that we spend their money appropriately. So thank you for your service.
Thank you, ma'am. I totally agree with you.
Any other questions? Mr. Brown?
Thank you, members of council. I appreciate it. Just want to remind you that this information that you have.
Mr. Brown, you need to get closer to the mic. I can't hear.
Okay, yes, ma'am. Is that better? Okay, I'm going to assume that's better. Members of council, thank you for the opportunity to have this discussion with you. The information that you have in your packet, I want you to continue to look at and review if you have additional questions so that we prepare for the 9:15 meeting where council may take up these items, that we can have these questions answered for you. I did have a takeaway, and I just want to kind of clarify my takeaways. My takeaways include finding out information related to the voter registrations and elections grant to determine whether or not the state can be involved in that process. And if not, Richland County has already started the process of indemnifying itself against the grant information. Also, I had an additional takeaway related to the Riverbank Zoo to determine what mechanisms we can put in place to potentially fund that request that came from the Riverbank Zoo. So those are two of the takeaways I have. And then the third takeaway was a question that was asked by Councilmember Myers in forwarding information about Tetra Tech's contract and scope of work. So those are the items that I've taken away, Mr. Chair. And again, I appreciate the opportunity to present this budgetary information. Hopefully it's been helpful and will help you make good decisions on the budget going forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of council.
Any final questions before we close the session?
Mr. Chair,
Mike, you recognize?
just want to ask Mr. Brown, if you would, in looking through the book that you all sent out yesterday, the amendments that you distributed, your recommended budget amendments, I noticed between the FILO intake and the property taxes intake, there is obviously a whopper of a difference. I'd like to see some visibility of the impact of the FILOs that we're giving, so that if there were no FILOs, what would the taxable revenue be? What would the tax intake be for the county, and how that compares to property and other taxes? And just a separate question as to, with regard to those FILOs, if we have any visibility of how many jobs in Richland County any of those FILOs have created. Thank you.
Okay, yes, ma'am. I'll work with Director Rubel. I heard you ask a question or provide you documentation on, without the FILOs, what would the amount of taxable revenue be? And then at the same time about job creation based on those agreements. Is that correct? Did I get that right?
Yes, sir. That's absolutely correct.
Okay, I'll work with Director Rubel and his team to address those matters. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other final questions? If not, thank you very much, and I'll declare the meeting adjourned.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.